Okay, this is a lecture on dial M for murder. You might wonder what that's all about. Anyway, basically, the dial M for murder is going to be the way I'm going to title my remarks on the first meditation of Descartes. The first meditation, you can think of the M as for meditation. Descartes has 6 meditations, so you can think of the M for meditations. But you can also think of it uh, as representing murder. There was a famous Alfred Hitchcock movie in the 50s called Dial M for Murder. That's where I got this title from, Dial M for Murder. Okay, so that's what I think is a good title for the first meditation. And another thing too is that the M has 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 points on the M. And I'm going to use the 5 points on the M as a way of making sense of the way you progress through the 5 stages of the first meditation. Dial M for murder. Okay, so there's a murder in the first meditation. And the question obviously is, well, what's the murder of? The answer to that is what is being murdered in the first meditation of Descartes is certainty. So that's what's being murdered, certainty. What Descartes is looking for in the first few meditations is he's looking for certainty. So the very first sentence of the first meditation, it starts like this. It is now some years since I detected how many were the false beliefs that I had from my earliest youth admitted as true, and how doubtful was everything I had since constructed on this basis. So when Descartes is writing his meditations, it's some years since he realized how many false beliefs he had accepted as true from childhood onwards, and how all that he had built on those false beliefs was uncertain, because anything you build on a weak foundation is going to be uncertain. So that's how the first meditation starts out. He starts out recognizing or confessing that he had accepted many beliefs that were false. And again, as I mentioned in an earlier lecture, in Descartes' day, science did not exist in our sense. So there was no secure knowledge at all. I mean, in Descartes' day, they were still debating whether the sun went around the earth or the earth went around the sun. And it was in Descartes' day also, I think, under Harvey was the guy that discovered that the blood circulated. So, this is compared to what we know, what scientists know today. It's very primitive. So in Descartes' day, there was no knowledge. Science did not exist. And basically, the knowledge that they had in his day was based upon authority, the authority primarily of Aristotle and other ancient authorities, like Ptolemy, the Ptolemaic system that had the sun going around the earth. Okay, so the second step then, in the very first part of the first meditation, is that once he has recognized, it's been some years since he's realized how many false opinions he has accepted and how doubtful is everything he's built on those false beliefs. He has a solution to this. I must rid myself of all the opinions I had formerly accepted as true. So he has all these false beliefs, all these false opinions. Well, what's he going to do about it? How's he going to get rid of them? Well, he's going to rid himself of all the false beliefs. Now, and elsewhere in his writings, he talks about having a bag of rotten apples, and you want to just keep the good apples. What do? You just go through the bag, and you look at each individual apple, and you throw the bad ones out, and you keep the good ones. Well, when it comes to beliefs, you can't do that because we have millions of beliefs, and it's impractical to look at every belief and examine it. Because you can look at every object around you and say, like, for example, I believe there's a pen here, I believe there's a piece of paper, I believe there's a table. It will never end. So what Descartes is going to do, he's not going to look at each individual belief he has. He's going to look at the basis on which all those beliefs were founded. So that's the second step. He's going to rid himself of all the false opinions that he's had. And once he's done that, then he will be in a position, if he can find something certain, if he can find something certain, then he will be able to use that certainty as a basis for constructing science. Okay, so anyway, that's what the meditations is all about, at least in the very first part of it. He's looking for certainty. That's what he wants. When he has certainty, then he can use that certainty to build a foundation for science. Descartes is a rationalist. He believes that science is has a deductive methodology, meaning once you begin with indubitable premises or absolutely certain premises, you can then logically deduce consequences from those premises if you argue logically. That's very different from the empiricist view of people like Bacon and Locke. Okay, so anyway, let's look. Today I want to go through the first meditation. Basically, there are 5 stages: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'll put a minus here down here and a plus up here. The minus means that his quest for certainty has failed. The plus means that it seems that it has succeeded. At least it seems that it has succeeded, but eventually it turns out that it actually failed. Then it seems again that it succeeded, and then it ends up failing. So by the end of the first meditation, you notice it ends up on a minus sign, meaning his quest has failed, or the certainty has been murdered. So in the second meditation, though, so the first meditation ends it has a pessimistic ending. It ends in failure. In the second meditation, it will end on a plus, and he will actually in the second meditation succeed in finding certainty. Okay, so let me go through the stages of the M. So the first meditation is going to be, what's going to be murdered is certainty. Descartes is looking for certainty. He's looking for something on which to build. He wants certainty as a foundation on which to build science. Let's start here. This is sense perception. So I'll write the word sense perception. At the beginning of the first meditation, Descartes notes that all his beliefs about the world, like there are trees, there's a sun, there's a moon, and so on, is all built upon sense perception. Okay, now he obviously cannot examine every individual belief he has based upon sense perception, because he would never finish his examination. But he does conclude, he argues this, that our senses have deceived us. We know that as a fact. And there are many examples you can give. If you look at a cup of water and the straw looks bent, you take the straw out and it's not bent. You're walking down the street, you see what seems to be a person coming towards you, and you get closer and you realize it's really the shadow of a tree. So the point is that he makes in the first part of the first meditation is that the senses often deceive us. We've often been mistaken, and he then argues that if you've been deceived one time by a person, that person is no longer trustworthy. You can't rely on them. And since we know that we've been deceived by our senses are not reliable. You cannot build a firm foundation on sense perception. So science cannot be built upon. So if you're trying to find a foundation for science and it's going to be based upon sense perception, it's not going to work, because sense perception will never yield certainty, because we know we've been deceived in the past. And if we've been deceived in the past, we can't trust our senses in the future. So the first meditation, it begins here. So stage 1 is down here on the left-hand part of the M. So it begins with a minus. Sense perception does not, certainty is killed at this stage. Up here, though, it looks like he's gained the certainty he wants, because he concludes this up here. He argues that, it is true that we cannot rely on our senses. Our sense perception is fallible, so it's not going to give us the certainty it needs. But he says, there are cases when we know that our sense perception is not deceiving us. He gives an example. He says, I'm sitting here reading a book. I'm in front of a fire. I'm in my pajamas. He says, I can't be mistaken about that. there are certain, if I didn't believe that I'm sitting by a fire reading a book, he says, I would be mad. I'd be like this crazy person thinking my head is a pumpkin. And he goes on like that. So there are certain things that we know are true. Like right now, I know I'm sitting here and there's a table here. I can see it. There's a piece of paper. There are certain things that you cannot doubt. Even though it's true that sense perception is untrustworthy, there are certain things that you cannot doubt. So this would be here as the sitting. I'll just put sitting by a fire, reading a book. That's the example he gives. He says, so it looks at this stage that he has found something that he can be absolutely certain about. But then he starts thinking a little further, and he realizes that, every night he goes to sleep, and when he sleeps, he dreams. And sometimes he dreams, and he says, sometimes I've dreamed that I'm sitting by a fire reading a book. And it seems absolutely like it's real. It seems he's dreaming, though. So he then concludes that I cannot really trust my senses when I'm sitting by a fire reading the book, because I may be dreaming. So at this point, anything based upon sense perception is not going to yield the type of certainty he wants, because there's always a possibility that you may be dreaming. Like right here, it looks like to me, it's evident that I'm holding a marker in my hand, but Descartes reflects, I may be dreaming. I could be dreaming, hallucinating this. And then I could wake up from my sleep, my dream, and I realize that I wasn't holding a pen in my hand. So the dream stage is the third stage of the first meditation. And what it means is that the quest for certainty, again, has been murdered. But then he thinks about it a little further, and he says, well, you know what? When I'm dreaming, sometimes I dream of a triangle and I count the sides, 1, 2, 3, or I dream of a square, 1, 2, 3, 4, or I add 2 and 3 and I get 5. And he says, well, you know what? If 2 and 3 is 5 in a dream or outside of a dream. So even if you wake up from a dream and realize, you're dreaming, right? And you add 2 and 3 in your mind and you get 5. And let's say you wake up and you realize that you were dreaming. You weren't really awake when you said 2 and 3 is 5. You were dreaming. But Descartes says it doesn't matter whether you're dreaming or not, because 2 and 3 is 5 inside a dream and outside a dream. So up here you have mathematical and logical truths can be absolutely certain. The dream cannot affect that. So math and logic. There are certain things we can be absolutely certain about, and that's mathematical and logical truths. So it looks like he's now found what he wants. He wants absolute certainty. But then he reflects and he says, well, this is a thought experiment, and he doesn't take this, he doesn't believe it's really true. It's a logical possibility. In philosophy, it's called a thought experiment. And he thinks this. He says, it's possible that there is some evil demon, this evil demon that's tricking me. And that every time I add 2 and 3, I add it wrong. Or every time I count the sides of a triangle, I say 1, 2, 3, but it's actually, it's not 3 sides. So it's the evil demon down here. It's called the evil genius or the evil demon. This is a thought experiment. Now, he says, it's possible that an evil demon is tricking me all the time. And so no matter what even mathematical truth, see, 1 and 1 is 2, I think 1 and 1 is 2, but actually it's not, because this evil demon is messing with my mind. That's the end of the first meditation. The first meditation ends basically with the quest for certainty has totally been murdered. And it seems like there's no way to gain certainty. Once he's introduced this evil demon, it seems like we can't know anything. Because no matter what even mathematical truths, we can't know, because this evil demon can be tricking us. That's how the first meditation ends. It ends with the murder of certainty. The question is, how is Descartes going to find certainty once he's introduced the evil demon? I'll talk about that in the next lecture.